I think that if you do end up in this situation where you make a decision and then you regret it, that you should kind of sit there and think about that for a good long while. And the main question that you need to be able to answer is, what was it? Like, what happened? What did I do wrong that I ended up making this decision too quickly, without thinking it through, without understanding what the potential consequences of it are? Like, what was my mindset at the time that I made this decision? And how can I ensure that as a parent, I will not be in that same situation again at some point in the future where I make another decision and then afterwards I'm like, man, that was a really dumb decision. Why did I do that? Welcome to Mom Alternative, where we discuss motherhood, parenting, and relationships. Today is all about how to make decisions as a couple. We'll be covering what rights do fathers have, regretting circumcising your son, when to listen to a doctor's advice about feeding your baby, and what expectations are reasonable to have towards your husband. Our first thread of the day is titled, What Rights Do Fathers Have? Recent thoughts. I read on here recently that the majority of women believe fathers don't have the right to be consulted or have a say in 1, breastfeeding or formula feeding a baby, 2, aborting or choosing to keep a child, in how and where a child is delivered, who gets to be in the delivery room, etc. I'm curious, if fathers don't have an equal right to make decisions or have any real input regarding pregnancy and baby, what things do you feel that they do have the right to be consulted on? Do fathers have any decisions that they're allowed to make regarding the pregnancy or the baby that mothers don't? And if not, do you feel that is equitable? Now, this is a really interesting thread to me because I think I fundamentally disagree with the premise here. I do think that all of those topics are topics that fathers should have a say in. And the argument is quite simple. Everyone will always, throw around the bodily autonomy argument. And so the theory is, okay, pregnancy impacts women more. Carrying a baby, choosing to breastfeed a baby is obviously, the burden is much heavier on the woman than it is on the man. And therefore, the woman should get final say with regards to all of these things. Now, I kind of don't necessarily disagree when it comes to the final say aspect of it, I guess, because I don't think, for example, that you can choose to force a woman to breastfeed. That's obviously not going to happen. What I do think is a problem, though, with that mindset is you're assuming that the woman's body and the child's body are things that you can quite easily separate. And that's not the case. So for as long as pregnancy is happening, during the pregnancy, as well as choosing to breastfeed, that whole phase there impacts the baby's body as well. You cannot choose to make decisions for the woman independently without them impacting the child. And of course, as the father, they have a right to make decisions that impact the child. They have an equal say when it comes to the child's health and to the child's well-being. And so it takes 2 people to make a baby. You cannot make a baby with just one person. Even if the woman bears a heavier burden, that does not mean that you get to exclude the father from all decisions. Now, obviously, a forum like this is going to be very much heavily on the side of the woman and will argue that the woman should make all of the decisions. So here's an example. I think there are good arguments for and against both breastfeeding and formula feeding. And I do think that if you have a healthy relationship with your partner, you should be able to sit down and discuss pros and cons and make a combined decision together. If, for example, I really, really, really did not want to breastfeed and my husband came to me and said, you know what, I think breastfeeding is really important for these and these and these reasons, then I do think it's fair, like he should be consulted, and I think that he should get a say, and I would take his opinion pretty seriously, and maybe we would be able to make a decision together along the lines of maybe I can try it out for a couple of weeks, or I can try it out for a month and see how it goes, and then if it doesn't go too well, then I can obviously change my mind and back out, or we could already decide to split it. So we formula feed some of the time and I breastfeed some of the time. So it's not too intense for me. Whatever decision we make, I do think that he should get a say. And I think it's pretty polite and pretty reasonable for him to go, no, but I think it's really important that we do this for these reasons. I don't think that this is like, hey, I'm going to force you to produce milk and feed the baby. When it comes to abortion or keeping the child, I actually believe that if either one of the parents wants to keep the child, then they should definitely keep the child. And I know that some people will be like, oh, but can you force a woman to go through pregnancy? I believe that the woman decided to engage in sex knowing that there is a risk that results in a pregnancy, in the same way that the man decided to engage in sex knowing that there's a risk that results in a pregnancy. And therefore, if like a lot of the arguments for abortion, in my opinion, kind of disappear if one of the biological parents is actually willing to care for the child and wants to keep him or her. When it comes to how and where a child is delivered and who gets to be in the delivery room, now I do fundamentally believe that the woman, like the ideal childbirth scenario is one in which the woman feels maximally comfortable and like with the least amount of stress possible. And that's the type of childbirth that is the scenario, I guess, that is the most likely to result in a healthy baby and a comfortable birth. So when it comes to how and where the child is delivered, I do think that men should get a say and you should be able to come to an agreement there as well. But I don't think that it's the same. I don't think it's equivalent to the others that do impact the child. Although, again, where you decide to give birth does have some kind of influence on the baby as well. And similarly with who gets to be in the delivery room, I had a bit of an interesting debate about this one with my husband, because I do think that, for example, if the mother says, I want my mom present, but the mother-in-law does not get along with her son-in-law, so with the husband in this scenario, then I would expect both to just act like adults and kind of get over the fact that they don't get along for the sake of the mother who's giving birth. But there is, for example, a scenario, let's say I am pregnant with my ex's child, and now I'm in a relationship with a different man. Does it feel right for me to say I don't want the father of the child present, which is fair enough, we're not together anymore, I'm not comfortable having him around, then that's okay. But then to have the other man that I'm now seeing present at a different man's son's birth or child's birth, that seems a little bit weird to me. That seems at least disrespectful. Now you can say, ultimately, it's still the woman's choice. If she decides to do that, then she decides to do that. And I would agree with you, I guess, from a legal perspective, but I think just from a moral and ethical standpoint, it does not seem right to treat the father of your child in that way. And so the moment that you have gotten pregnant with another man, that man does have a say. All that said, I'm assuming here that the men we're talking about are not abusive, are not violent, or, you know, that whole row of behaviors where I would say it's best to completely separate yourself and your decisions and your baby from that person. If they're going to be involved in the baby's life, if they actually are the father, not just like in the biological sense, but they will be raising the child as well, then they should have a say. Now, this is a pretty controversial opinion. You'll see the vast majority of people here in the forum do not agree. The first person here says, fathers can get someone pregnant and disappear and choose to never be a parent. They get choices in basically everything that does not directly involve the woman's body. Now, I would argue where this might be possible, I do actually believe that fathers carry a pretty heavy burden from the responsibility side of things. And this is a legal responsibility as well. So you can always get child support from the father. And for as long as there is that responsibility, then that means that they also have parental rights to the child as well. And you'll see the next one says, I think a woman should have full bodily autonomy. At the point where that ends, a father should have equal say. So she goes through each of these items. She says, when it comes to breastfeeding, formula feeding, as any parent knows, both lead to a fed child, but the woman should have full right of refusal on whether her body is used to feed her child in continuation of the previous 9 months where her body was used to feed the child. A father's job is to support that decision. When it comes to abortion, the man's choice is at the point of ejaculation. The woman's choice is as long as it impacts her body. How and where a child is delivered. There are 2 medical patients in the delivery of a baby, neither of which is the father. There is 1 adult patient who can make medical decisions of who is not the father. And the final one, who gets to be in the delivery room. A delivery of a baby isn't a show, it is a medical event. Now, yeah, as I said, the bodily autonomy argument is the one that comes through the strongest for the most people. And I honestly, I don't even disagree with that. What I do disagree with, though, is the idea that the baby's body is part of the woman's body, and therefore the woman gets to make unilateral decisions that impact the baby's body during that period of time. I think one of the burdens, I guess, that you take on when you become pregnant is now suddenly you are responsible for a separate life, a separate baby, a separate body. And it's hard for me to say, like, for as long as you cannot create that person by yourself, then there is a certain element of the other party, the father, who is necessary for that baby to exist, should have a say as well. I think that fundamentally this may be just a point of opinion. I really disagree with this idea when it comes to abortion. The man's choice is at the point of ejaculation, and then the woman's choice is as long as it impacts her body. I don't think that it works that way. I think it takes two people to make a baby, and therefore two people should be involved in the raising of the baby. Yeah, I get, again, maybe there's a difference here from the idea of what's a legal argument versus what's a moral, ethical one. I don't think that you can ethically force women to invite other people into the delivery room that she doesn't want to have present, for example. Fine, fair enough. Of course not. But I think that there is some kind of moral responsibility towards the father of your child to try and involve him in as many decisions as possible. I guess when it comes to who gets to be in the delivery room, you could see the point of the father wants a person present that the woman doesn't want present. In those circumstances, I think it's quite easy to say, nah, the woman can say no to people. But I think that it's better to be able to discuss these things and make a combined decision. And it's always worth consulting the father, in my opinion. If the father then has an opinion that the woman disagrees with and she gets to override him, then fine. But I think saying that he does not get a say at all is not right. I don't think that's fair or moral. Now you'll see, here's the example of kind of how people summarize this. All the things that you've listed relate to a woman's body and what happens to it. Why should a man have any say? And then some people actually say, no, but the breastfeeding and formula feeding, you can, for example, say, should we feed formula milk versus breast milk? And that's obviously a decision that can be made by both parties. It does not necessarily have to be the woman choosing to breastfeed. And that's obviously the case as well. One person who I think the only person who's a little bit in the middle here, she says, of the four things you mentioned, I think that the relationship between the parents dictates how much say the father gets when it comes to breastfeeding formula, delivery location, and guests at the birth. For instance, I'd expect a happily married couple to value each other's input and wishes in those scenarios, but I wouldn't expect the same if there wasn't a relationship, for example, when it comes to exes, a one-night stand, and so on. And the fathers in those scenarios would not have equal say. Regarding the decision to abort or keep the child, I think if either parent wants to keep the baby, regardless of which parent it is, that's the decision that should be upheld. And she gets completely pilloried by the forum for this opinion because everyone's like, no, but you cannot force a woman to carry a pregnancy to term. And yeah, obviously abortion is its own topic in general. But fundamentally, I think that this attitude of whatever the woman decides should go is one that excludes men from taking responsibility for their actions, for their babies, for their children. And that's obviously not going to result in a healthy relationship between father and child in the long run either, and also not between the mother and the father either. So in general, fundamentally, where at all possible, it should always be the case that both parents are involved in fundamental decisions that impact their babies. The next one is titled Circumcision Regrets. My boy is 10.5 months. Circumcision wasn't really a debate between my husband and I, but just something that we expected to have done. Lately, I've been having some regrets on doing this because I've seen it lately as a pretty archaic practice. Like, who are we to mutilate our child's body because of societal standards? I know there's no going back, but feeling some strong regrets in making this decision for him. Anyone else? Now, I am not pro-circumcision. I would never choose to circumcise my child. And I fundamentally believe that you should not be making permanent alterations to your child's body unless they are medically necessary and by medically necessary, I do mean actually literally medically necessary. We think it would be better for his mental health or something along those lines. So that's just so you know my angle coming at this. I think I mean, yes, obviously there's no going back. Like once you've made a decision, you have to stick with it. But what makes me really sad about this particular decision is this idea that it's just something we just expected to have done. We did not take the time to properly think about it or to do research or to understand whether we wanted to do it or not. Like I understand the people who at least look into it and then they still decide to do it anyway. I have a lot more respect for that style of parenting than I do for the people who just do things without considering them, especially when those things have long-term consequences for your child and their health. And obviously there are some circumcisions that go wrong, and I can only imagine the pain and the regret that a parent must have if a circumcision goes wrong, and then at the end of it you're kind of like, yeah, well, I'm not sure why we even decided to do that. That's pretty horrifying to me as a situation that could impact some people. So fundamentally, I think it is one of those things that, at the very least, as a parent, you should take the right that you have over your child's body and the right that you have to make decisions for them pretty seriously, and treat it as seriously as you can. Try to make the best decisions that you can, and not be this kind of lighthearted, just inconsiderate person who just makes decisions on the spot without thinking about them too hard. Now, I understand that quite a lot of parenting happens a little bit instinctively, I guess, for a lot of people. For example, when it comes to food and what they feed their kids, you just kind of feed them whatever you have available. And that's not necessarily, I kind of do think that that's a problem. I think you should consider every physical decision that you're making for your child, and you should take it pretty seriously. And that starts from the moment that they're born. When it comes to feeding, it includes things like circumcision, it includes things like ear piercings, it includes things like vaccines. Like every single decision that you have to decide, decision that you have where you can change what you can, I guess, put something inside your child's body or take something from your child, especially if it can impact them permanently. Now, I'm not talking about giving them particular medicines, for example. If you say, hey, it's just if it's a one-time thing, even if it is somewhat poisonous for them, their body will likely flush it out and get rid of it. But anything that really has the potential to impact them permanently is a pretty big deal. And it makes me kind of sad that people don't treat it that way, because I guess as a parent, you have so many decisions that you should be making, that's kind of the standard. I guess you just make the decisions and move on with your life. Now, you can see here some I also fundamentally disagree with pretty much everything that the people here say. I'll give you a couple of examples. So this person says, I refuse to discuss my son's genitals online, so I can't come from a place of relatability. My advice is to speak to your son's pediatrician about why you regret the procedure and how you can handle your concerns as he grows. You definitely can't uncircumcise, but I'm sure there's interventions along the way that can help you with your concerns. And then someone kind of calls her out on this. She says, yeah, but doctors do it as standard anyway. And she says, I'm not having the circumcision discussion. Different people have different beliefs when it comes to this. So that's where I stand. She made a decision. She no longer likes that decision, but there's nothing that can be done. So the only thing to do is to move forward with the consequence of the decision and attempt intervention as it comes necessary. And she's fundamentally right. Like once you've made the decision, you can't undo it. So you have to somehow come to terms with it and move on. But I think that if you do end up in this situation where you make a decision and then you regret it, that you should kind of sit there and think about that for a good long while. And the main question that you need to be able to answer is, what was it? Like, what happened? What did I do wrong that I ended up making this decision too quickly, without thinking it through, without understanding what the potential consequences of it are? Like, what was my mindset at the time that I made this decision? And how can I ensure that as a parent, I will not be in that same situation again at some point in the future where I make another decision and then afterwards I'm like, man, that was a really dumb decision. Why did I do that? So I think that you have, like, you owe yourself and you owe your son, at the very least, that learning experience. You owe it to yourself that when you move on, you don't simply go, oh, well, I can't do anything about it now, so it doesn't really matter, but that you actually sit there and go, okay, this feeling of regret is trying to teach me something. What is it trying to teach me? And for your son, whose body was changed, you need to be able to, at some point in his life, if I guess a lot of guys don't maybe have the question, or think about it too hard. But I would expect that if I were to make a decision like that for my son, I'd be able to sit down and explain to him at some point when he's older why I decided to do it. And I think I should be able to do that with every decision that I make for him. And if the answer is, it was a mistake, it was a dumb decision, I didn't mean to, I just didn't think about it hard enough, and there were some arguments for and against it that I hadn't fully considered, then that is what I have to be able to say to my child. So I think it's fundamentally important. It's not like one of those things where you're like, yeah, nothing can be done about it, so I should just move on. But you should actually take it pretty seriously and do a lot of self-reflection on the tail end of that. Next one says, I've seen quite a lot of parents with regrets online in regards to this, parents who made the decision to circumcise their first son and not subsequent ones after learning more about it. Many people still consider it to be the norm and don't research it beforehand. You're not alone. You can't go back, but you could make a different choice if you have future sons. And then everyone just spends a lot of time trying to kind of comfort her. Here's a perfect example of that. She says, it might have been one of the first decisions that you made that you regretted, but it won't be the last. Welcome to parenthood. We make decisions, we make choices every day. And as we grow and change, we sometimes come to believe that the choices we made previously were wrong and sometimes even downright harmful. Some of those choices are permanent. Give yourself grace and move forward. I mean, I agree that you can't sit there, like, once you've made a decision and you feel like you messed up, you can't just sit there and, again, self-flagellate the whole time and be like, oh man, I'm the worst person ever. I'm the most terrible parent to ever exist in the whole world. And what have I done? And yes, okay, fair enough. You do not need to be completely over the top. You don't need to get super emotional about it, but you should learn from it. You really, really should. And I think that as a parent, you have a responsibility and a duty towards your child to try and raise them in the best possible way that you can. And part of raising them in the best possible way that you can is that when you make mistakes, you actually learn from them. So no, I think my primary advice to OP would be like, okay, maybe actually sit down and reflect on this. Why did you make that decision, really? And are there any other decisions that you are making right now for your child that you haven't properly thought through, that you haven't researched, that you don't understand? Because that's the only way that you can really say that you've learned from this as an experience. Here's an example, another example of a comment. I know that once your outlook on this issue has shifted, it can be hard to understand what you were thinking before your son was born. You need to remember that you always wanted the best for your son, and that's exactly why you chose to circumcise. It's very likely that the majority of your social circle made the same decision. More importantly, our medical system encourages it and subsidizes it. It can be very hard to swim against that tide, especially as young or first-time parents. There are so many other decisions to make when you're pregnant, and often there's no reason to think that this issue deserves special attention over all of the other things that you're dealing with. The first thing to do is forgive yourself and promise to do the right thing if you have another son in the future. Live and learn. Next, even though it is tempting to try and put this behind you, I think it's important to try and make a difference so that other parents don't make the same mistake. This does not have to be a big thing. Without being judgmental, you can share your regret with other people in your life who are pregnant. You can share your story on sites like this. You can make a small financial contribution to organizations like Intact America or Your Whole Baby, which are trying to raise awareness and lobby for change. It can be very cathartic when you feel like you may have helped another family. Now, I like most of what she says here. And I think most of what she says is true and is right. And the learning of maybe try to speak up about your experience and what you've learned from this, so that maybe you can encourage other people to reconsider it before they decide to do it. But I really hate everything that she uses to kind of excuse it. So everything from, you wanted the best for your child, so it's okay. It's likely that the majority of your social circle made the same decision. The medical system encourages it, so it's hard to swim against the tide. I honestly really believe that you are doing your child a disservice when you make decisions for them on the basis of, well, everyone else is doing this, so it can't be that bad. I don't think that this is good. I think that you should always have a certain amount of critical thought and just a critical mind, because ultimately you're not even making a decision that will just impact you. It will impact your baby. And for as long as your baby doesn't get a say, then you have to be careful as a parent. Now, obviously, I'm being a bit mean here because maybe because it's a circumcision topic and I'm quite touchy about that one. But no, I fundamentally think that if you screw up in a permanent way in front of your kids, then you have to really, really contend with that. And contending with that does not mean just going, oh, well, it's done now, I can't do anything about it. Contending with that really means understanding why you did that, how you did that, and how you can stop yourself from doing it again. I think this is very fundamental in terms of just my image of an aspiration towards what being a good parent should look like. This is an exclusively breastfeeding mom. She says, pediatrician says my baby is eating too much. Everything I have read encourages to breastfeed on the baby's schedule. Sometimes she can eat up to 6 ounces. She's just shy of 8 weeks and she weighs 10.8 pounds, that is. She told me to only feed her 4 ounces every 2 hours. I can only monitor that if I pump and make a bottle. I love nursing and don't want to just do bottles. Has anyone else heard to get them on a feeding schedule this young? Thanks. Now, the funny thing about this one is that often pediatricians and doctors are held up as the gospel truth. Their advice comes from the word of God and we should all follow it. I believe that this is pretty common in the mum sphere anyway, but maybe again, I'm being a little bit harsh here. In general, I'm not even saying, I'm not knocking doctors as a whole. But what I do think very often happens, especially with pediatricians or with other doctors who do the same types of procedures over and over and over again, is they kind of get into this, in my opinion, autopilot mode, where they're so used to doing and saying a certain thing that they don't really engage or interact with you as a human being, as an individual who has their own medical history, who has their own circumstances, who has their own opinions and thoughts and so on. And what that feels like when you're on the receiving end of it is that you're kind of like a little cog in the wheel and they're just getting you through the routine stuff. They're telling you the routine stuff. And maybe they give you advice that they believe is applicable to 90% of babies or to 90% of mothers or whatever it is. But that advice is not actually tailored to your situation. That's my biggest problem with doctors across the board. And it happens especially often with pediatricians because quite a lot of what they do, at least where I live, is pretty regimented. They always have the same set of tests that they go through with a baby and so on. And then the same bits of advice that they give. And obviously most new parents have the same kinds of questions. And that's kind of the outcome. Now, I honestly don't believe that we have ever at any point in our history, barring the last, let's say 50, 60 years, considered the actual exact amounts that babies are drinking. And so this is one of those bits of advice where I'm a bit like, especially when it comes to breastfeeding, I understand that with formula, there's a lot more variation. And I even understand if you're bottle feeding all the time, because there as well, maybe it's a little bit harder for babies to regulate the amount that they want to drink, just because a bottle usually has a bit of a faster flow. But fundamentally, I would always be like, okay, so we haven't really been able to know exactly how much babies are drinking and how much variation there is in that ever in our history, except for the last few decades. Can a doctor really give amazing advice when it comes to that? Especially if a doctor is saying, feed her less than she seems to want. That seems very dodgy. If a doctor is saying, you probably need to feed her more because she's not gaining weight, then fair enough. That makes perfect sense. And you can observe her weight gain and see that there's an actual consequence to the amount of food that she's eating. But feeding her less sounds to me like a huge risk would be having a starving baby who's super hungry and is not being fed just because someone is following a doctor's instructions. And so honestly, sometimes I believe that doctors, despite the fact that they are in this amazing position of they have a huge responsibility and they kind of have a lot of power when it comes to giving advice and providing recommendations for mothers, sometimes I really feel like that responsibility is not taken quite as seriously as it should be, and advice is given too lightly and too quickly. Now, obviously, I'm talking here from my personal experience. If anyone's like, hey, you know what, my doctor's amazing and she always treats us the best and she always looks after us and knows exactly what our baby needs and so on, then I'm super happy for you. That's awesome. Having a great doctor makes a huge difference. But what I always feel for everyone is that you should, again, have a little bit of critical thought. It's important to actually consider the advice that your doctor is giving you and to try and find out. One of the hilarious situations that we had with our pediatrician, we tried to ask him about why he was doing some of the procedures that are like some of the regular tests that they do with babies here. And one of them is this ultrasound where they check the hip joint to see that the hip joint is growing properly. we asked him exactly how often do babies have problems with this. And he was like, you know, he sat there and he thought about it for a little bit, and he went, you know, something like 5%. So he claimed that 5% of all babies suffer from a hip malformation when they are born. And then, of course, we looked this up when we got home, and the actual number was something like 0.003%, which is a huge, huge, huge difference. So huge that it actually boggles my mind that he was that far off, because it would have meant that, you know, 5% would say that that 5 out of every 100 babies, or 1 out of every 20 babies that he sees, are suffering from this, you know. So he should have experienced it, or should have known it. And so, yeah, in general, that's how I feel about this one. I would not be trying to get my baby on a feeding schedule, and I would have asked my doctor why she thinks I should restrict the amount that my baby wants to nurse, if she wants to nurse naturally. And pretty much everyone in the comment, which is actually quite surprising, pretty much everyone in the thread also says the same. So here's an example. She says, "That's so weird. I've never heard of this. I personally wouldn't listen. Everyone's breast milk is different. Some have plenty of calories or whatever per ounce and only need 4, and others need 8. Did the pediatrician say why? I would listen to what your gut is telling you." And then OP says, I told her that sometimes when she eats out of the bottles, she'll eat, say, 4 ounces, and then 20 minutes later, she'll eat another 2-ounce bottle. She didn't give me a reason. She was just like, don't do that. She asked me if she was spitting up, and she hasn't been, so I don't know. I think I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. Then she said, don't worry about her routine until 4 months. So maybe she was just having an off day. And you can see this is often what really happens to people. They get this kind of advice where they're like, I don't really understand why I should be doing that. And then for whatever reason, in the appointment, it doesn't actually come up, and then they go home, and that's when they think about it, and then they're like, I don't think that makes a lot of sense. Now, if she was a little bit less critical, she would go, okay, I'll just do that, and then she'll go ahead and do it, and then she might have a baby that's suffering and hungry for absolutely no reason, based on advice that she doesn't understand and she doesn't know why she should follow. So that's why I think that this is a problem. Another one here, she says, if you're feeding from the breast, I wouldn't worry about the baby getting too much. The baby will know how much she needs. You could potentially overfeed with a bottle if you feed too fast, but it sounds like you're doing fine. So, doctors. This one says 10.8 pounds. My baby weighed that at a month, and the doctor said that was great. Keep up the good work. I would personally ignore the doctor. It's hard enough without doctors saying stuff like that. Doctors are generally great, but they can be wrong, and I definitely think in this case they're wrong. From everything I've been told and researched, you can't overfeed a breastfed baby. And so this is just to illustrate that sometimes doctors give advice just a little bit too lightly, and I think that as a parent you always have the responsibility to not follow advice without thinking it through. I'm not saying don't consider your doctor's advice. You should always consider your doctor's advice, and you can always listen to them. But at the very least, you should be able to sit down with them and ask them why they think certain things. And then you just have the responsibility of understanding why it is they're recommending something, and what's the danger or the risk that you might be facing if you don't follow that. Our final thread of the day is titled, Dude, I haven't changed. You just don't like me. I feel the resentment in our relationship growing. I've had postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety, and I'm finally feeling more like myself, but my relationship with my husband just isn't good. I feel like I do everything without help when he's home all day without a job. He was injured in the army. He suffers from depression, so I try to be understanding. But he sleeps in until the afternoon, stays up until 2 or 3 a.m., and then I'm left to care for the baby by myself, along with the housework. He does load the dishwasher every night and will occasionally switch over the laundry for me. I calmly talk to him, saying that I feel angry all day long when I'm busy constantly and he's upstairs playing video games. I wake up early every morning. I take care of our little one's needs, cook all meals, etc. His response was, Dude, I haven't changed. You just don't like me. And then said that he hasn't done anything. Thoughts? This is one of those utterly depressing threads for me. I think that it's hard for people once you've already gotten to this point where you have a baby and you are married, you've been together for a long time, and somehow you had the baby without being on the same page when it comes to how you work together, how you negotiate. Obviously, having a baby changes all of those things anyway, but it sounds a lot like the foundation wasn't even there for them to be able to build on in order to then to then decide to change things, then it's just really hard to solve it from that point onwards, because you are already exhausted, you're already tired, you're already responsible for another human being, and your first responsibility and your first duty is to that baby. So how much time and energy can you really invest in fixing your marriage at the same time? It's really, really tough. I feel awful for people who end up in this situation. It sounds again like the husband here is suffering from quite a lot. When she says that he was injured and he's home all day without a job, then it sounds like he's not able to work, which is really heartbreaking for a lot of men. Heartbreaking is the feminine way of describing that, but I'd say utterly depressing and demoralizing for a lot of men when they're not able to do anything. And so everything else that he does kind of seems to me like there are ways to cope with that. And it's a shame that having a baby was not the change that he needed in order to go, okay, you know what? I'm responsible for our family now. I'm responsible for a child. I need to somehow change my life circumstances so that I'm not quite so depressed, so I'm not suffering quite so much. But that's not easy. Like, some men will respond to a child in that way and other men obviously don't. And then the question is, where do you go from here? So for me, if I were OP, I think the fundamental question would be, is there a prospect of this changing in the future? Does he have the desire and the willingness to change? What other sources of help can I count on, can I bring into my life so that I'm not so exhausted and I'm not so tired? I don't think that you can solve it. Fundamentally, the solution here has to come from him. And so the question is, can you really sit down and talk it out? And he's probably like, when he says, I haven't changed, you just don't like me, that is quite damning, honestly, as a statement, because it suggests to me that OP made the decision to have a baby with him, despite the fact that he was already like this. And that's quite rough. So ultimately, honestly, you save yourself from a lot of heartache if you are able to try and get on the same page and ensure that you have the same values as your husband or your partner before you get pregnant, because that really just makes such a giant difference to your quality of life and to what it's like to parent. A lot of the suffering and the negative experiences that people have when it comes to parenting are, in my opinion, down to people just not having the support systems and the help that they need to be able to have a good time, and to feel like they're supported, they're working with someone, they have a team around them. When you don't have that, then you just feel lonely and resentful and tired and exhausted and sleep deprived, and all of these feelings just build up, and it's just not a good situation for you or for the child, and that's fundamentally the saddest thing about it. So I think that would be the main question that I would have for OP and that I would have for myself if I was in this situation. Is there a prospect that this will change in the future? If there is not, then it's hard to see a way out, and a way for the relationship to improve. Fundamentally, that desire has to come from him, and there's nothing that you can say as the wife in this case to try and convince him to change. It's really a question of, does he think that there's a problem with how he's living his life? And if he does, then what are the ways that you can support him in trying to change that? If he doesn't, then you're kind of like, you kind of have to live with it, which really sucks. First person here says, ask him if he's willing to change, and if not, perhaps it's time to cut your losses and move on. And OP says, this isn't the first time we talked about this, so I'm worried that I already know the answer. I'm definitely one of those people who hates it a lot when people just suggest divorce. But obviously it's one of those things where you're like, okay, this is kind of an untenable situation. You can't continue in a marriage like this in the long run. So what's really the outcome? And so this is one of the very few cases where I don't think that's the most terrible thing that you can say to someone. The next one says, that's exactly the problem. He hasn't changed his life one bit. Life changes when you have a baby. He has to change. If he wants to continue living life like he doesn't have a child, then I agree, you are probably better off doing it on your own. At least then you won't be angry with the useless person lounging in your house all day. It's really so sad. She says, that's what I was thinking. I told him that I thought he would have changed when we had our daughter. I thought his priorities would change. Sometimes he'll say things like, if I was single, I would, or if you ever leave me, I just feel like he doesn't want me and our daughter. And there the question really is, was this feeling already there the whole time before you decided to have a kid? Or like, I'm assuming you decided to have a kid. If the kid was unplanned, then I guess that exacerbated it. And I guess it's something where you can go, okay, maybe you would have been able to foresee it. But it's shocking to me that you had your relationship in that type of place and then decided to have a child. Again, assuming you decided to have a child. If you didn't decide to have a child, then that's even worse. Then that's really, really unlucky and unfortunate. Next one, she says, he's probably not wrong. He has likely been this way for months or years and you've still remained married. So in his eyes, he absolutely hasn't changed. However, that doesn't make it okay. How long has he been without a job, sleeping until the afternoon, not helping with the kid? You don't have to tolerate this. Hell, I wouldn't. If I felt like a single mom, I would just be one. But to his point, he's been doing the same thing and you haven't left him yet, so he's not going to take you seriously. And OP replies, it's been a few years. We met in college and he had several spine surgeries when we were dating. He was driven and had plans, but that changed when his health took a turn for the worst. He's able to do day-to-day tasks, but can't be overly active. The thing is, I was a teacher, so I was out of the house for about 60 hours a week, so I wasn't well aware of his schedule. On the weekends, we would spend time together and I'd want to sleep in and stay up late, so it wasn't really an issue. But I thought things would change when we had a child. I thought his schedule and his priorities would change. And so that's really a major problem, both the fact that she was out for 60 hours, and so she says that she wasn't even aware what kind of schedule he was really keeping the rest of the time. So that says to me that you're so far apart in your marriage and in your relationship that you don't even know what the other person is up to or what they're doing all day. And that just boggles my mind. That's already very clear. That's probably not the right environment to bring a child into until you understand, you have a better idea of what the other person's values are and what their priorities in life are. And then the next one, assuming that someone will change after you have a child is probably not a good plan of action either. At the very least, throughout the pregnancy, I would have had quite a lot of conversations about what your expectations towards having a child look like. Like, what do you expect to happen to your life? What do you think will change? What are you looking forward to? What are you dreading? These are kind of fundamental conversations that you should be having as a married couple when you're pregnant, because then it at least allows you to try and build, again, some kind of foundation from the values side, from the expectation side, so that you have the opportunity to say, look, I think I'm probably going to have a hard time with, waking up really often. And so these are the kinds of things that are important to me. And when I consider our different roles and what I'll be helping the baby out with and what you'll be doing, then the things that I'm really looking forward to seeing him grow up. I'm really looking forward to helping him eat. I'm really looking forward to doing things like baby sign language, just whatever it is. Like, how do you envision parenting to be for both of you as an experience? And if you're on the same page there, now obviously it's going to be different when you have a baby, of course, but at the very least, on the theoretical level, you're on the same page, and then you have something that you can work with when it comes to, will you change, will you not change? If you've never had this conversation, then why would you expect him to change? And I think that that's a fundamental problem when it comes to decision making as a couple. If you're making decisions unilaterally as an individual on the basis of assumptions that you have not run by the other person, that the other person hasn't actually said or agreed to or committed to in any way, and obviously even agreeing to something doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to happen, but at the very least, if the agreement is there, then that means that there's some willingness there, then you're probably making mistakes, and it's really, really awful to have as a consequence. Then now you have a child, and if you break up your marriage, then your child has to somehow, let's say your child's relationship with both parents will be damaged in some kind of way. Suddenly your child's security and stability isn't there the way that it could have been if you had made that decision to have a child from a better foundation to begin with. So it's really, really sad, very unfortunate. And I would hope that most people can at least take from this, when you decide to have a kid with another human being, that is a major, major decision. And I'm a big advocate for it. I don't think it's anywhere near as big of a decision as most people think it is, but you do need to have a relationship that's kind of in a good place as much as possible. And what you should be working on is, what will your relationship look like once you have a baby, and how will that change? And if both of you are aware that it's going to change, that you are willing to work on it in different ways, and you have priorities and those priorities match up, then you already have a much better foundation to become much better parents in the future with. That's all we've got time for today. If you liked the video, feel free to like it down below, or leave a comment if you disagree with anything that I said, and feel free to subscribe for other content. I will see you next time.